Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us, Lucy.
Thanks,
Um,
Maggie.
to start, can we just know a bit about your background, please, and how you came to write your book, Coming of Age?
Yes, so I'm an academic psychologist. So I did an undergrad in psychology and a PhD in psychology, where I focused on adolescent mental health. And that's my kind of day job at the moment, is researching adolescent mental health. And then I wanted to write this book focusing a bit less on mental health and a bit more about adolescent development more broadly.
Nice. And before we get into the details, can you give us a brief overview of why this is such a vital developmental stage?
Yeah, so I guess it's useful to think of it as like what a person is like before adolescence starts and what they're like by the end of it. So it's a kind of massive transformation that needs to take place in order to get a child to be a kind of independent, competent adult that can navigate the world on their own. So it's a period of huge change to get there. So biological change, psychological change, and all that change is happening at the same time when there's this massive social change, which is going to secondary school. So it's a period of a lot of disruption, which I think makes it fascinating to study.
Yeah. And through researching your book, or maybe just through your career more broadly, what have you come to think of as new realities and challenges for teenagers today, and what strikes you as being kind of forever true?
Yeah, I think people focus a lot um, on the new stuff, not enough on the fact that a lot of the challenges that adolescents are facing today are challenges that they've always faced. Obviously, social media is relatively new, but I think a lot of the time it just reflects or amplifies what adolescents have always faced, which is really kind of challenges in their relationships with their peers and understanding themselves. So I think new technology gives new ways to express those
Mm.
issues, but really the kind of underlying challenges are the same, which is partly why I wanted to write the book, really, that to understand adolescence today, um, we should focus a little bit less on what's new and a little bit more on understanding what adolescence is and always has been.
Yeah. And I'm curious, when you were writing the book, was it the audience you had in mind? Was it mostly uh something to help people reflect on their own adolescence, or was it for parents with teenagers, or maybe just for teenagers themselves?
Yeah, I'm interested to know what teenagers themselves think about it, but it was really primarily about helping adults understand their former selves. So I was very interested in the fact that adolescent memories are very powerful for people. They elicit quite strong emotional responses. You know, people often feel a lot of shame or distress or embarrassment or self-consciousness about what they were like when they're an adolescent and or what happened to them. So the main original goal was really about helping people understand adolescence in order to understand themselves and be a bit kinder to themselves, I guess.
And what are the connections between kind of common mental health conditions and the period of adolescence?
Um, well, it's a period of risk for mental health problems starting. Um, so is childhood. So, like some anxiety disorders are more likely to start in childhood than adolescence. But generally, if you're ever going to develop a mental health problem, it's most likely to have happened by the end of adolescence, by the early 20s. So it's definitely considered to be this period of risk, and therefore people are very interested in it as an opportunity to intervene to reduce mental health problems or ideally prevent them before they've started, but we haven't quite figured out how to do that yet. But there's a lot of interest in it as a period of risk for these problems starting.
Mm. And on the subject of risk, I mean, teenagers are notorious risk takers. What have you learned about why that is the case?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Not all of them are, but in particularly people who are anxious are more reluctant to take risks. But on average, people you see an increase in risk taking in adolescence. And I think there's lots and lots of interesting reasons why that's the case. But a lot of it is because they're trying to figure out how to be independent adults, and that involves trying out things and making mistakes and taking risks to kind of figure out the world for themselves. So a lot of it's linked to that. But there are other components like adolescents tend to have heightened levels of sensation seeking. So they're interested in what risks feel like psychologically and physically. And then there's the whole social component, which is that adolescents often take risks to fit in with their friends. So it's actually slightly counterintuitively a kind of safety behavior quite often, because they're taking a risk like drinking or driving without a seatbelt in order to gain social safety and social acceptance.
And on I mean, I guess we know from our own experiences, and also just from, you know, you see how important it is for teenagers, their friends, their social networks, and their peers. And you talk in the book about how being well liked and being popular are actually two quite different things. And what are the kind of characteristics of those groups, and what kind of impact can that have on teenagers?
Yeah, so there's this interesting idea about popularity in adolescence, not necessarily meaning that you're liked. So there's the kind of cheerleader version of popularity, which is about visibility, really. So they're kind of people who are that kind of popular. It's often like kind of being the mini celebrities in your school. So people, you tend to be risk takers, and people tend to know what you're up to and know who you are. And so you tend to have social status, but there's this slightly surprising thing that actually, if you ask people who they like, often those kind of characters aren't necessarily very well liked. So then the being actually liked is a separate kind of popularity called sociometric popularity. So more like people actually like you, you're very pro-social, you're helpful, you don't bully people. So you can sometimes get this kind of split where you have these people who are popular in inverted commas, but they're actually not very well liked.
And what is the long-term impact of teenage bullying?
Can be very bad. It's not guaranteed, but it's one of the most difficult things that can happen to you in adolescence in terms of its enduring impact on your mental health, because it's bullying is a kind of repeated social rejection, ostracism, humiliation, and it's happening at a time when you're trying to fit in with other people and understand who you are. So if you're bullied, you kind of internalize those messages about how other people treat you, and about how kind the world is and what people are like. And that can have really significant impact across lots and lots of different mental health problems, including depression and social anxiety and psychosis. So it's a serious problem that needs to be better respected and taken more seriously because of the impact that it can have, because it's very difficult to prevent or to stop bullying once it's started.
Yeah, thank you. And it's kind of similar to the risk and safety contradiction you mentioned earlier, but you talk about the teenagers conforming and rebelling, rebellion as an act of conforming. I mean, what is that phenomenon all about?
Yeah, so it's this, I think the cliche is often that teenagers are really rebellious, but if you look a bit closer, they're often conforming very closely to each other. So even if they are rebelling against some sort of convention, they're conforming in a different way. So they might be rejecting kind of adult imposed rules and ideas, but they're copying each other quite closely in terms of what they do and what they wear and what music they listen to, etc. So there's this kind of split between maybe rebelling against the adult rules, but still conforming pretty closely to your peer group.
I mean, why is it that peers are so important? Is it replacement family? Is it kind of as simple as that?
Yeah, it's like almost a kind of halfway house. So if you go back to kind of the basics of what adolescence is, and it's about becoming independent from your family group, then you need a kind of transition point where as you move away from your family, you need another group of peers to accept you and help you feel safe and understood. So that's why the peer group becomes so important. And you just spend massive amounts of time with your peers, the same group of peers, relative to what you're doing in childhood or in adulthood.
That makes sense. And I mean, what do you think teens could do to look after themselves at this difficult time of their lives?
I think just have more, they should have compassion towards themselves about the fact that they're going through a genuinely difficult period of life. I think that should be respected and taken seriously. But it's difficult because their ability to relax and look after themselves is so constrained by the demands that are put on them. Teenagers are under a ridiculous amount of pressure in so many different ways, especially academic pressure. So I think a lot of what they could do to look after and support themselves is slightly constrained by the systems that they're in.
Okay. But what are some of those things if they were system free?
What are the systems that they're under
No, as
pressure?
in what are the things they could do to look after themselves outside of those constraints?
I guess a lot of things that adults can do in terms of spending time with the people that you love and care about, and getting enough sleep and exercising and doing things that you enjoy and that you find rewarding and interesting. All the kind of typical advice that is good for well-being at any age, but they're more limited with their time about how to squeeze that in, and restricted more because they haven't got as much freedom to dictate their own schedule. They can't travel where they want to travel to and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember you made the point in the book actually, particularly to do with sleep and the schedule of school, how that is just completely at odds with what your average teenager might actually need.
Yeah, exactly. So their sort of biological clock is shifted a few hours later on average, which means they're not tired until later in the evening, but they're still really, really tired in the morning. But then school starts early, so they kind of have to repeatedly get up at a time when their body still needs them to be sleeping. And I think that, there should be more attention on that publicly, and the difference that would make if teenagers could sleep a bit more, because sleep affects everything, your ability to regulate your emotions and your mood in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, with these systems in mind, I guess it's almost, it's like treating adolescence as a practice ground. But I mean, is it a mistake to think about adolescence as a kind of immature adulthood rather than its own thing?
I don't know, I guess it depends what you mean by immature adulthood, because they are practicing adult independence. I guess that's the whole point, is that they're figuring out how you live independently and how you have relationships and friendships that are separate from your family. So I guess in a way it is a mini version of adulthood in that respect, but it is also a totally distinctive period of life. The biological and psychological development that's happening makes it really distinctive, particularly in terms of how much you care about your friends and your peers. So I don't know, I think you can call it an immature adulthood as long as you still have that awareness about the distinct challenges that they face.
Yeah, thank you. And what did you learn about yourself doing your research? Did you have any surprise reflections? Do you have any advice that you would give your teenage self? What was it
I
like?
mean, it definitely made me think about my own adolescence when I was writing it, because that's what I want the goal of the book to be, is to make people reflect on their own adolescent years. I mean, I think one thing that really struck me was about the importance of friendship, and how lucky I was to have such good friends that I had in secondary school, which are still my good friends, because I think it's just an incredibly important sort of source of support, and source of feeling validated and accepted and looked after and having the opportunity to talk about what's happening to you. And some people just get really unlucky. They either don't find good friends, or they're in a friendship group who turns on them, or who they feel rejected from. And also obviously there's the kind of more obvious problems of bullying as well. And those things can really linger if that's how your apparent friends treated you. So I think that's the main conclusion I took from it about myself.
I'm glad. Thank you so much, Lucy. That was really fascinating.
Okay.
Really appreciate you giving us time.
That's okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.